Welcome everyone. Chapter 4 Monopoly Reforms Act of 1909, Monty Chelmsford Act of 1990, Main Provisions and Hierarchy, the Nehru Report, and Jinnah's 14-point formula. This video we will be discussing about Nehru Report and Jinnah's 14-point formula. Nehru Report. Nehru Report is considered to be one of the most important thing which has happened in the history of Indian national movement. This report is known under the name of Pandit Motilal Nehru, who was the chairman of this committee to frame a report and submit to the British Parliament. This committee and the report is a result of the Simon Commission's visit to India. We all know that there were many kinds of reformations which were happening about the Indian national movement and also about the self rule of the Indians. So the Britishers appointed John Simon and Lord Birkenhead, the State Secretary for India in the British Parliament, asked the Indian national movement to submit a report which is accepted by all the political parties in India. Actually, it was a challenge to the Indian national movement to have a report which is accepted by everyone in India. And the Indian National Congress accepted this challenge and they appointed Motilal Nehru to head this committee and prepare a report and to submit to the Britishers. So the Simon Commission and his visit to India is a very vibrant thing in the history of India. There were many massive protests against the Simon Commission's visit. You would have heard about all these protests. Simon, go back, that was the slogan which was used during his visit to India. So actually, we all considered that visit to be a dominant one because after whatever he submit, the British Parliament will accept it and the India's self-rule dream can be collapsed. But this Nehru report was really a challenging one in the history of India. So the Britishers gave a chance to us, and based on that, the Indian National Congress accepted the challenge. They called for an All India Party conference where all the political parties were invited on 12th February 1928 in Delhi for the first time. So we know that many political parties were there in the Indian freedom movement. They all assembled, they all shared their views. 29 parties were there in that meeting, but many different kinds of opinions were there, even though the committee started its works and they submitted the report on 15th August 1928 to the British government. The members in the Nehru Committee report is also very much important that they all were the most prominent leaders of that time. So the committee was very much aware about the consequences because when all parties are there, we have to accept with the demands of all the parties. So the members which are to be selected to the committee should be that eminent enough. So as we already discussed, Pandit Motilal Nehru was the chairman of the committee, where there were Sir Tej Bahadur Shastri, Sir Ali Imam, Sir Mangal Singh, Shuaib Qureshi, M.S. Annie, G.K. Pradhan, Subhash Chandra Bose, and Jawaharlal Nehru. These were the members who were there in that committee. So you can see that the father himself was the chairman and the son himself was the secretary for this committee. As said, the Nehru Committee report has many kinds of objections inside the All India Party Conference. All the political parties had their own kind of views and their own kinds of regulations which should be added to the report. But somehow the Nehru Committee represented all the communal sections of India, the Muslims, Hindus, Mahasabha, non-Brahmins, Sikhs, laborers, like that they represented all the sections of India, and somehow they framed up a kind of report which can be called as recommendations of Nehru Report. So the first recommendation which was made by the Nehru Report was the dominion status for India. Dominion status means India need an independent characteristics of a state. The Britishers are not new to this concept because they already had dominion states under their rule. For example, Canada was a dominion state under the British rule at that time. Australia was a dominion state under the British rule of that time. So they all were the part of the Commonwealth, and the first demand which was put forwarded by the Nehru Report was the dominion status, where India will be the part of Commonwealth but an independent status. But many young, vibrant members of that committee, like Subhash Chandra Bose, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, they were against that concept because they don't wanted the concept of dominion state under the Commonwealth. They wanted India to be an independent state. But even though in that committee report we recommended to have a dominion status for India. Second recommendation was federal form of government with a central legislature. This concept is more or less similar to the British parliamentary system, where there will be a central government, and under that central government, again, here comes the difference, federal form of government. That is something similar to the US structure, like the provinces getting federal power. So at the center, there will be a government for the country as a whole, and the provinces have their own power. But what happens is, like, the central legislature gets more power as that legislature consists of the crown, the British crown, British empire, the Senate, and the House of Representatives or the elected representatives. So this was the second recommendation. Third one was rejection of communal electorate. This is very much important because we studied that by the reformation of 1919, communal electorate was introduced in India. And this was something which really boosted the division among the communal or the religious wise kind of categorization inside India. So this committee recommended that there should not be no communal separate electorate inside India, and they demanded that the state should be a secular state without no official religion. And rather than that, the community is getting a minority representations or reservations inside the provinces. That is enough, but no more communal kind of thing should be happened inside India. Fourth recommendation was that creation of new provinces, because the British state inside India was very big, and it included many regions which had linguistic background. For example, if you take about Madras state of British India, you can see that it comprised of the regions of Tamil Nadu, Tamil speaking people, Tamil Nadu, the present state of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, like that. So that linguistic line or that linguistic kind of derivations should be given with importance. So a new provinces should be created inside the British India with linguistic lines. The fifth recommendation by the Nehru Committee was introduction of fundamental rights in the Constitution. This was very much important of that time because Bill of Rights was something which the state gives to the people. So incorporation of 19 fundamental rights was very much demanded by the committee to the British government, which includes equal rights to men and women as citizens. There is no division between the gender kind of derivations. Then rights like freedom, liberty, equality, freedom of religion, education, labor, and most important, equal voting rights for men and women above the age of 21. That is universal adults franchise. These kinds of things were demanded by the committee, which they demanded it to be fundamental rights. That means the most important thing which should be given to the people by the state, even which the state cannot interfere. Next one was creation of central executive. Until then in India, we don't have the concept of Governor General, but the committee recommended for a creation of a central executive, which we can equate with the present presidentship of India. So, a creation of a Governor General as the constitutional head of India, which will be appointed by the Crown. So, that will be the connection of India with the Crown because the constitutional head of India will be coming under the Crown and he or she will be appointed by the Crown directly. And there will be ministers to assist him with a Prime Minister. So, this was the recommendation of the committee. Next one is very much important in the history of India, creation of Supreme Court. The committee suggested to have a Supreme Court to decide the judicial perspectives of India. And they demanded that that court should be the final word for all juristic kind of things inside India. The Governor General and the Parliament will decide over the aspects of the Supreme Court, but they demanded to have a Supreme Court for India. Next recommendation made by the committee was a defense committee and civil service. Defense committee was for the security and protection of the country with the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, commanders of chiefs for Army, Naval, and Air Force, creation of civil service through Union Public Service Commission appointed by the Governor General. These were some of the recommendations which were made by the committee. So, if you look into all these recommendations, what you can find is that the committee is asking for more kind of sovereign powers to the people of India. It is a kind of reformations which they demanded to the British government. The response to the Nehru Committee was something which already expected because this report was something which really demanded or asked the British government to give Indians with more powers, more sovereign powers, which was something which the Britishers was not able to accept. So most of the recommendations submitted by the Motilal Nehru Committee was rejected by the British government. They were not ready to accept the most of the demands which were put forward by the committee. And what happened really was that, as we already said, there were no unified kind of decision inside the all party conference. So the problem started. Many of the political parties which were there inside the Indian subcontinent was not ready to accept some of the recommendations of the report, especially the person who was against this report was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He represented the Indian National Muslim League, and they were completely against the concepts of the recommendations made by the committee. But somehow Mahatma Gandhi ji was there. He was very active with Indian politics by that time, and he uh, compromised the things, and somehow the report was able to submit. But Jinnah was totally against some of the recommendations because he demanded to add certain things which was proposed by him, but that was rejected by the committee members and that was not added. So by the time of submission itself, Jinnah was against that concept, and that led to the formation of 14-point formula by Jinnah. So that was the response. So ultimately, the response was that the committee report, which was submitted by Nehru committee, was totally rejected by the Britishers. Some points they took, but most of the recommendations was rejected. Mohammed Ali Jinnah. Now we are going to discuss about Mohammed Ali Jinnah, who is known as the father of Pakistan and also an advocate and one of the most prominent leaders in the Indian national movement. Even though he was the man behind the formation of Pakistan, his contribution to the Indian national movement or the freedom movement cannot be completely avoided. He was one of the most prominent leaders of that time. But the thing was that he was the main spokesperson for the Indian National Muslim League. He stood for the Muslim community, and that can be the reason for the formation of Pakistan and led to the politics of separate land for the Muslims and all. But his contribution to Indian national movement is very much vibrant, and that we cannot be avoided or deleted from the history of Indian national movement. The 14-point formula formulated by him was something which emerged as his dissatisfaction against the Nehru Committee report. He totally said that this committee report is something which is not satisfying the demands and needs of the Muslim community. And he wanted certain things to be added to that report, which was rejected by the committee and which made him to come up with this 14-point formula. And this 14-point formula, which he made, was really attracted by the Muslim community, and later we all know that it was ended with the formation of a new state known as Pakistan. Before we study about Jinnah's 14-point formula, we have to look into the points which he put forward in front of the Nehru Committee to be added before submitting the report. There were three main suggestions made by Jinnah to the Nehru Committee report. First one, which he suggested, was that the Muslims must have one-third representation in the central legislature. Second thing, the Muslim representations in Punjab, Bengal legislature should be on the basis of population for 10 years because Punjab and Bengal was the region where the Muslim population was very high. Like at present, if you look, the Bengal, present Bangladesh was a region which was at that time it was East Pakistan. Punjab side, now the present Punjab, one portion is with Pakistan and one portion is with India. So you can imagine about the Muslim population. So that's why he demanded for that. Third one, residuary powers should not be vested in the center but in the province. That means the province should get more control over the residuary powers. Residuary powers are the ones which are not mentioned in the constitution where the center can take decision. But that kind of thing should not be completely taken by the center, but the provinces should be also given with importance. This was the three recommendations made by Jinnah, but that was not accepted, which resulted with the formation of 14-point formula by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The 14-point formula is actually 14 points that was recommended by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The first one was that the government should be of federal in nature, where residuary powers should be with the provincial government. That is, there can be a central government, there can be a provincial government, but the residuary powers or the things which are not mentioned in the constitution should also be given to the provincial governments to decide. Second thing, complete autonomy status for the provincial government. Like right now in India, we call India to be a quasi federal state. That means it is a partially federal state. But what Jinnah demanded was a complete federal state where the provincial governments are getting more powers, complete powers to decide their own things. There should not be any measures to reduce the powers of the provincial government. That was the third point. That means, by a constitutional amendment, the central legislature or parliament should not amend any part of the constitution which guarantees the powers to the provincial government. That was his third point formula. So the provincial government's powers, it should not be disturbed by the central government. Fourth point was that one-third of the total seats in the Central Assembly should be reserved for the Muslims. So, one-third inside the parliament should be completely reserved for the Muslim population. Fifth point was that separate electorate and representation for all the communities. This was something which the Nehru committee was totally against with. They demanded to stop the communal representation, but he wanted separate electorate and representations inside the legislature for all the communities. Sixth one, when the territorial reorganizations are being carried out, it should not affect the Muslim majority areas like Bengal, Punjab, North, West, Frontier Province. This point is something of very important kind of thing for Jinnah, because the Nehru Committee recommended to have new provinces on the basis of linguistic. So on the basis of linguistic, a kind of division is being done. There is a chance that the Punjab state can be divided with the formation of a new territory. So it will affect the population, Muslim population. Bengal also the same thing. Northwest Frontier Province also the same thing. So that was the sixth point which Jinnah put forward, that there should not be any kinds of affections on the territorial representation of Muslim majority areas. Seventh point was that all the religions should be given with complete freedom to attract the communities. So all the communities or all the religions or religious kinds of things should be given with complete freedom. There should not be any hindrances on this perspective, because already the Nehru Committee demanded for a secular state. So it should not affect the communities or the religions. The eighth point in Jinnah's 14-point formula is that no bills in the legislature should be passed if three-fourths of the minority community feels that it is against their interest. That means the majority of the minorities, if we feels that this bill is going to affect our powers or our representation, it should not be passed. The ninth point put forward by Jinnah was that the province of Sindh should be separated from Bombay province. That means Bombay province was a big province. So the Sindh area, which is right now in the present state of Pakistan, he demanded to separate it from the Bombay state. Tenth one, not to have any discrimination against Northwest Frontier Province and Balochistan on constitutional reforms, because these two areas there should not be any kinds of separate kinds of discriminations made done during the constitutional reforms. 11th one is to ensure adequate Muslim representation in all the services and other government bodies, because the Muslim populations should get adequate representation in all the government bodies or the administrative bodies. 12th one was to protect and promote Muslim culture, language, religion, education, laws, and religious institutions. It should not be sidelined or marginalized in the name of secularism or in the name of nationalism. 13th point was that one-third number of ministers in the central and provisional cabinet should be Muslim community. That means adequate representation for the Muslim communities in the central cabinet as well as in the provisional cabinet. 14th point why Jinnah was that there should not be any constitutional amendments or changes to the Indian constitution without consenting the federal governments. That means the provincial government should be consulted before any kinds of changes carried out to the constitution. So these were the 14-point formula put forward by Mohammed Ali Jinnah. So if we keenly look into this 14-point formula, what we can find is that he was very much concerned about the Muslim population, and he wanted to ensure that in any of the manner the Muslim populations are not being separated from the mainstream Indian government or the administrative system. So that was the key thing behind the 14-point formula, and he was very much firm with this formula, which finally resulted with the formation of a new state which is known as Pakistan. So by this, we just reached to the conclusion of the fourth chapter. So the fourth chapter is something which deals about the major constitutional reforms which has happened in the Indian subcontinent during the time of national movement. So it discussed about Mindomoli reforms, it discussed about Nehru Committee report, as well as Jinnah's 14-point formula, and it gives you as an idea how the national movement perspectives were boosted inside India to have a constitution. So by this, we wind up the session. Thank you. Have a nice day.